Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison stood at the bridge windows of the Earth vessel Defiant. The stars looked cold and distant, as they always did in deep space, but today felt different. Today they were heading to Harmony Point, the neutral space, station where the Galactic Council held its most important meetings. Jake pressed his hand against the cool metal of the wall and tried to push away the memories that kept coming back. 3 months had passed since Lisa died. 3 months since Commander Lisa Park gave her life to save others. The pain was still fresh, like a wound that would not heal. "Sir, we'll reach Harmony Point in 2 hours," said Lieutenant Ben Taylor from his station. Ben had been Jake's wingman for 5 years. He understood the weight his friend carried. Jake nodded, but did not turn around. "Any word from the diplomatic team?" "Ambassador Carter is reviewing the final proposals. She wants to meet with you before." "We dock. The meeting ahead was supposed to be routine. The Galactic Council wanted to discuss mining rights in the Kepler sector. 3 human colonies had been established there over the past decade. The colonies were small, but growing fast. They had good people working hard to build new lives. But the Zelathi Empire also wanted those worlds. The Zelathi were one of the oldest races in the galaxy. They had been exploring space when humans were still learning to make fire. Their empire stretched across hundreds of star systems. They were powerful, proud, and not used to being told no. Jake finally turned away from the windows. The bridge of the Defiant was small compared to the massive ships of other species, but it was efficient and well designed. Every human vessel was built with care and attention to detail. They had to be. Humans were still newcomers to galactic politics. They could not afford mistakes. "Ben, tell me about Admiral Kexthara again," Jake said as he walked to his command chair. Ben pulled up a file on his screen. "Admiral Kexthara of the Zelathi Empire. Age is listed as 312 years. He's been in command of their fleet for over 2 centuries. His victories include the Siege of Mordok Prime, the Battle of the Twin Suns, and the campaign against the Razor Swarm." Jake had read the files many times. Kexthara was a legend. Stories of his battles were told across the galaxy. Other species spoke his name with respect and fear. He was everything a warrior was supposed to be: skilled, experienced, and honorable. "The interesting part," Ben continued, "is that he specifically requested to lead the Zelathi delegation. Usually, they send diplomats to these meetings. Kexthara is a soldier. That bothers me too," Jake said. "Why would a military commander want to handle trade negotiations?" The answer came from behind them. Ambassador Helen Carter walked onto the bridge carrying a datapad. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She had been negotiating with alien species for 20 years. "Because this isn't really about trade," she said. "The Zelathi want to test us. They want to see if humans will stand up to pressure." From a galactic legend. Helen moved to stand beside Jake's chair. "The 3 colonies in the Kepler sector are thriving. They're showing other species that humans can succeed in space. The Zelathi don't like that. They want to keep us small and dependent." Jake felt anger rise in his chest. Lisa died protecting Zelathi civilians. She gave her life to save their families. And now they want to take our worlds? "Politics and gratitude don't always go together," Helen said softly. "But we're not going to let them push us around. These negotiations matter, Jake. What happens at Harmony Point will affect every human colony in space." The comm system crackled to life. "All hands, prepare for arrival at Harmony Point. Docking in 90 minutes." Jake stood and smoothed his uniform. The blue and silver of Earth's Space Force looked simple compared to the elaborate uniforms of other species. But Jake wore it with pride. Every human in space represented Earth and all the people back home who believed in their mission. "What do you need me to do?" he asked Helen. "Be my military advisor. Watch for threats. And remember that we're not just representing Earth. We're representing everyone who believes that smaller species deserve respect. As the Defiant approached Harmony Point, Jake could see the massive space station through the main viewer. It was built like a giant wheel, spinning slowly to create artificial gravity. Ships from dozens of species were docked at its outer ring. The station had been neutral territory for over a century. No weapons were allowed except for ceremonial purposes. Jake thought about Lisa as they prepared to dock. She would have loved this assignment. She always enjoyed meeting new species and learning about their cultures. She had believed that humans could find their place in the galaxy through friendship and cooperation. The docking procedure went smoothly. Jake and Helen gathered their materials and prepared to board the station. As they walked through the airlock, Jake felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He was here to honor Lisa's memory by keeping the peace she had died trying to preserve. Harmony Point was impressive inside. The main corridor was wide enough for 20 people to walk side by side. The ceiling was high and decorated with symbols from every member species of the Galactic Council. Beings of all shapes and sizes moved through the halls, speaking in dozens of languages. The Zealothi delegation arrived yesterday, Helen said as they walked. They've been meeting with other species, probably trying to build support for their position. Jake noticed the looks they were getting. Some aliens watched them with curiosity. Others seemed dismissive. Humans were still new to galactic politics. Many species still saw them as primitive upstarts who had gotten lucky with their technology. They reached the diplomatic quarters that had been assigned to the human delegation. The rooms were comfortable but not luxurious. Jake set up his equipment and began reviewing security protocols. As military advisor, he needed to be ready for any situation. That evening, there was a welcome ceremony for all the delegations. Jake wore his dress uniform and accompanied Helen to the main hall. The ceremony was formal and elaborate, with speeches from representatives of major species. Then Admiral Kexthara entered the hall. Jake had seen pictures, but meeting the legend in person was different. Kexthara was tall, even for a Zealothi. His blue-green skin was marked with scars from countless battles. His eyes were cold and calculating. He wore a uniform covered with medals and honors from 3 centuries of service. The other delegates stepped aside as Kexthara passed. Even representatives of powerful species showed respect. Jake felt a reluctant admiration for the old warrior. Whatever happened in the negotiations, he was facing a formidable opponent. As the ceremony ended, Jake made eye contact with Kexthara across the room. The Admiral's expression was unreadable, but Jake sensed he was being evaluated. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Jake returned to his quarters, thinking about the challenges ahead. The negotiations would be difficult. The Zealothi would use every advantage they had. But humans had advantages too: determination, adaptability, and the memory of friends who had sacrificed everything for peace. He thought about Lisa one more time before sleep. Tomorrow, he would fight for the colonies she had believed in. He would not let her sacrifice be forgotten. The negotiation chamber was built like an arena. Seats rose in circular tiers around a central floor where the speakers would stand. Representatives from 47 species filled the space, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. Jake sat in the section reserved for military advisors, watching as Ambassador Helen Carter took her place at the human delegation table. Admiral Kexthara commanded attention even while sitting. His presence seemed to fill the room. Other military officers, some from species that had fought wars lasting centuries, showed him respect. Jake had to admit the old warrior had earned his reputation. The session began with formal greetings and procedural matters. Jake listened to the translator, device in his ear, convert dozens of languages into English. The technology was impressive, but it could not capture the tone and emotion behind the words. Chancellor Vexstar of the Galactic Council called the meeting to order. His species, the Mordani, had been mediating disputes for thousands of years. They were natural diplomats, with voices that could calm even the most heated arguments. "We gather to discuss the territorial claims in the Kepler sector," Chancellor Vexstar announced. "The Zelathi Empire has requested exclusive mining rights to 3 systems currently occupied by human colonies." Jake leaned forward. This was it. The moment that would determine the future of thousands of human families. Ambassador Carter stood gracefully. "Honored Chancellor, the human colonies in the Kepler sector have been established for over 10 years. The colonists have built homes, farms, and communities. They have families and children who know no other home." She activated a holographic display showing the 3 contested worlds. New Boston has a population of 50,000. New Denver houses 30,000 farmers who supply food to 6 other human colonies. New Phoenix is home to 20,000 miners and their families. The images showed bustling cities, green farmland, and children playing in parks. These were not temporary settlements. These were permanent homes built by people who had invested their lives in making a future among the stars. "The human colonies are thriving," Helen continued. "They contribute to galactic trade and offer services to travelers from all species. Forcing these people to abandon their homes would be a grave injustice." Murmurs of agreement came from several delegations. The Andorian representative nodded approvingly. The Centauri delegation whispered among themselves. Even some of the smaller species seemed sympathetic to the human position. But Jake noticed that the most powerful delegations remained silent. The Zelathi sat motionless. The hegemony representatives showed no emotion. The ancient firstborn watched. With calculating eyes, Admiral Kekstara rose slowly from his seat. The room fell silent. When a legend spoke, everyone listened. "Chancellor Vexstar," the Admiral began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber, "the Zelathi Empire has prior claim to the Kepler sector. Our survey ships mapped those systems 2 centuries ago. We have documentation proving our historical rights." Jake felt a chill. If the Zelathi could prove prior claim, the human colonies would have no legal standing. However, Kekstara continued, "the Zelathi Empire is prepared to be generous. We will allow the human colonists to relocate to suitable worlds elsewhere. We will even provide transportation and basic supplies for their resettlement." The offer sounded reasonable to those who did not understand what it really meant. Jake knew better. Forced relocation would destroy the communities the colonists had built. Many would lose everything they had worked for. Some would not survive the transition. Ambassador Carter remained calm. "Admiral Kekstara, we appreciate the Empire's offer. But these colonists have invested their lives in building their homes. They have legal rights under the Colonial Settlement Act. We cannot simply order them to abandon everything." "Legal rights?" Kekstara's voice carried a hint of amusement. "The Colonial Settlement Act is a human law. It has no authority over territory claimed by the Zelathi Empire." The debate continued for hours. Other delegations asked questions and offered opinions. The Mordani tried to find compromise solutions. The Andorians supported the human position. The hegemony seemed to favor the Zelathi claims. Jake watched the political maneuvering with growing frustration. This was not about law or justice. This was about power. The Zelathi were testing whether humans would stand up to pressure from a major galactic power dot. As the day wore on, Jake could see that the negotiations were not going well. The Zelathi had more political support than expected. Several species that had seemed neutral were now asking questions that favored the Empire's position. During a break, Jake approached Helen. "They're coordinating this," he said quietly. The Zealothi have been building alliances behind the scenes. Helen nodded grimly. I know, but we have to keep fighting. Those colonists are counting on us. When the session resumed, the tone had changed. The Zealothi delegation was more aggressive. They presented surveys and charts that seemed to support their claims. They brought up obscure legal precedents that favored established empires over newer colonies. Jake felt the momentum shifting against the human position. Other delegations were beginning to accept the Zealothi arguments. The political pressure was working. Then Admiral Kexthara made his move. The old warrior stood and walked to the center of the chamber. His movements were deliberate and commanding. When he spoke, his voice filled the room. Chancellor Vexstar, members of the council, I have listened to the human arguments with patience. But I must speak about the character of this species that asks us to respect their claims. Jake felt a warning bell in his mind. Something was wrong. The Admiral's tone had changed from diplomatic to predatory. 3 months ago, Kexthara continued, a human commander was involved in an incident at Station Omega-7. This commander was supposedly rescuing Zealothi civilians from a collapsing station. Jake's blood turned to ice. The Admiral was talking about Lisa. The human delegation would have you believe their people are brave and honorable. But I know the truth about Commander Lisa Park. The name hit Jake like a physical blow. Around him, other members of the human delegation stiffened in shock. Commander Park was a coward, Kexthara said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. When the station began to fail, she abandoned her post. She fled like a frightened animal, leaving innocent Zealothi civilians to die. Jake started to rise from his seat, but Ben Taylor grabbed his arm. Don't, Ben whispered urgently. Not here, not now. But Kexthara was not finished. The human commander saved herself while families died in the collapse. She ran to her ship and escaped while children cried for help. This is the courage that humans claim to possess. The chamber was absolutely silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat. The Admiral's words were lies, complete fabrications designed to destroy human credibility. Commander Park's death was meaningless, Kexthara continued. She died because she was weak and unprepared. Her failure cost the lives of 17 Zealothi civilians who trusted her to save them. Jake's vision blurred with rage. Every word was a lie. Lisa had saved hundreds of people. She had died holding a damaged docking bay door open so the last shuttle could escape. She was a hero, not a coward. This is the species that asks us to respect their territorial claims, the Admiral concluded. This is the character of humans when faced with real danger. They abandon their duties and flee. The silence stretched on. Jake looked around the chamber and saw the damage being done. Some delegations were nodding in agreement. Others looked uncertain. The human position was crumbling. Ambassador Carter was pale but controlled. She started to stand, probably to offer a formal rebuttal. But Jake was already moving. That's a lie, he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Every eye in the chamber turned to him. Jake realized he had just spoken out of turn in a formal council session. He could be expelled from the negotiations. But he did not care. Commander Lisa Park was not a coward, Jake continued, stepping into the center of the chamber. She was a hero who died saving the lives of people she had never met. Admiral Kexthara turned to face him. The old warrior's expression was cold and calculating. And you are? Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, Earth Space Force, and I was Lisa Park's friend. The two men faced each other across the chamber floor. Jake was younger, smaller, and vastly less experienced than the legendary Admiral. But he was also angry, and anger could be a weapon. You dishonor the memory of a woman who died protecting your people, Jake said. You lie to this council about her sacrifice. I speak the truth, Kexthara replied, The human commander was weak. She failed in her duty. And you know nothing about duty, Jake shot back. Lisa Park made 7 trips through a collapsing station to evacuate civilians. She saved over 200 lives. She died at her post, holding a damaged door open so the last shuttle could escape. The chamber erupted in whispers and conversations. Jake had just accused a galactic legend of lying to the council. The political implications were enormous, but Jake was beyond caring about politics. This was about Lisa. This was about the truth. This was about honor. The whispers in the chamber grew louder. Jake stood in the center of the room, facing Admiral Kexthara. The old warrior's expression had not changed, but Jake could see something new in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or interest. Chancellor Vextar raised his hand for silence. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, you are out of order. Military advisors are not permitted to speak during formal negotiations. Jake knew he was breaking protocol. He was probably destroying his career and damaging the human position. But he could not let Lisa's memory be destroyed by lies. I apologize, Chancellor, Jake said, not taking his eyes off Kexthara. But I cannot remain silent while this honorable warrior spreads false information about a fallen hero. The word honorable was delivered with just enough emphasis to make it sound like a question. Several species in the chamber caught the implication. Jake was challenging more than just the Admiral's facts. Admiral Kexthara stepped closer. You accuse me of lying, human? I accuse you of being wrong, Jake replied carefully. Commander Park's actions at Station Omega-7 are a matter of record. The truth can be verified. The truth, Kexthara said, is that your friend failed. She allowed civilians to die through her cowardice. Jake felt his control slipping. She saved 237 lives. She died holding a damaged docking bay door, open with her bare hands, so the last evacuation shuttle could escape. The only reason anyone died at all was because the station's reactor failed faster than expected. Stories, the Admiral dismissed. Human propaganda to cover up failure. Then let's ask the survivors, Jake said loudly. Let's contact the Zealoty families that Lisa saved. Let's hear their version of events. The chamber erupted again. This was becoming more than a diplomatic dispute. This was becoming a confrontation between 2 versions of the truth. Ambassador Carter stood up. Chancellor Vextar, I request a recess so that evidence can be presented regarding the incident at Station Omega-7. But Admiral Kexthara held up his hand. No recess is necessary. I have all the evidence I need. He turned to face Jake directly. I was there, human. I saw what happened. Jake felt the world shift beneath his feet. You were there? I commanded. The rescue operation. I watched your friend abandon her post. I saw her run to save herself while my people died. The lie was so complete, so detailed, that for a moment, Jake wondered if he had been wrong. But then he remembered Lisa's final message, transmitted to the Defiant just before the station collapsed. If you were there, Jake said slowly, then you know that Lisa transmitted her final status report at 14:47 station time. She reported that all evacuation shuttles had cleared the station and that she was attempting to reach the command center to activate the emergency beacon. Kexthara's expression flickered slightly. The human was confused. The situation was chaotic. She was clear enough to save your people, Jake shot back. Clear enough to die for strangers. The back and forth continued for several minutes. Jake presented facts he remembered from the incident reports. Kexthara countered with his own version of events. The truth was becoming lost in the political maneuvering. Finally, Jake made a decision that would change everything. Admiral Kexthara, he said in a voice that carried to every corner of the chamber, you have dishonored the memory of a hero. You have lied to this council about the sacrifice of a woman who died protecting your people. You have brought shame upon your own reputation by spreading false testimony. The chamber fell completely silent. Jake had just formally accused a galactic legend of dishonor. In most species cultures, this was a serious insult that demanded response. I invoke the right of personal combat, Jake continued. I challenge you to prove your accusations against Commander Lisa Park through trial by combat. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. The right of personal combat was an ancient law, older than the Galactic Council itself. It was rarely used in modern times, but it was still legally binding. Chancellor Vexstar looked stunned. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, are you certain you wish to make this challenge? I am certain, Jake said firmly. Admiral Kexthara has dishonored the memory of my friend. I demand the right to defend her honor. All eyes turned to Admiral Kexthara. The old warrior was studying Jake with new interest. A challenge to personal combat could not be ignored without loss of face. You are young human, Kexthara said finally. I have been fighting battles since before your species reached the stars. Are you prepared to die for these lies about your friend? I'm prepared to die for the truth, Jake replied. The question is whether you're prepared to face the consequences of your dishonesty. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. Very well. I accept your challenge. Traditional weapons. Combat until one of us yields or dies. The chamber erupted in shock. Conversations. Representatives from dozens of species were talking frantically into communicators. This was unprecedented. A human junior officer was going to fight a legendary Zealothi admiral in single combat. Chancellor Vexstar called for order. The challenge has been made and accepted. Under the ancient laws, combat will take place in the arena of Harmony Point. Weapons will be selected according to tradition. The combat will be witnessed by representatives of all council species. Jake felt the weight of what he had done settling on his shoulders. He had just challenged one of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy to single combat. His chances of survival were minimal, but as the chamber cleared for recess, Jake felt hands on his shoulders. Ben Taylor was there, along with other members of the human delegation. Are you insane? Ben asked quietly. Kexthara has killed hundreds of opponents in combat. He's 3 centuries old and has more experience than our entire military. I know, Jake said, but I couldn't let him destroy Lisa's memory. Ambassador Carter approached. Jake, I understand why you did this, but you may have just doomed the negotiations. If you die, the human position will collapse completely. Then I won't die, Jake said with more confidence than he felt. Over the next several hours, the human delegation worked frantically to prepare for the combat. Ben Taylor contacted the Defiant and had them transmit all available information about Zealothi fighting techniques. Other officers researched the rules of combat to understand what Jake would be facing. More importantly, they began contacting the survivors of Station Omega-7. The rescued Zealothi families were scattered across several worlds, but communication networks allowed them to be reached quickly. Commander Ben Taylor took charge of gathering testimonies. One by one, the survivors told their stories. The picture that emerged was nothing like Admiral Kexthara's version of events. She came back 7 times, said Marketh, a Zealothi engineer. 7 times through the collapsing station. My family was in the last group. We saw her holding the docking bay door open manually. The mechanism had failed, and she was using her own strength to keep it from closing. Another survivor, a teacher named Velara, provided even more detail. The human commander organized the entire evacuation. She assigned shuttles to different sections. She made sure families stayed together. When the automated systems failed, she took control manually. The testimonies painted a picture of extraordinary heroism. Lisa had not just saved lives. She had done so with skill, courage and compassion. She had made sure children were evacuated first. She had helped elderly Zelethi who could not move quickly. She had stayed calm under pressure and made decisions. That saved hundreds of lives. But the most important testimony came from Kexvani, the station's former commander. I was trapped in the command center when the supports failed. Commander Park could have evacuated with the last shuttle. Instead, she came back for me. She pulled me from the wreckage and carried me to safety. The last thing I saw was her running back to hold the docking bay door open. Jake listened to the testimonies with growing determination. Lisa had not just been a hero. She had been exactly the kind of person who made humanity worth defending. As the time for combat approached, Jake prepared his equipment. He would fight with standard human weapons, a plasma sword and combat knife. They were simple compared to the exotic weapons other species used, but they were reliable and familiar. Ben Taylor found him in the armory. The testimonies are being transmitted to the Council. Every delegate will have access to the survivor accounts before the combat begins. Jake nodded. Win or lose, Lisa's true story would be told. That was what mattered most. Jake, Ben said quietly, you know you don't have to do this. You've already proven your point. The testimonies show that Kexthara was lying. Political testimony can be dismissed, Jake replied. Combat cannot be ignored. This is the only way to make sure Lisa's honor is restored. As he finished checking his weapons, Jake thought about his friend. Lisa had always believed that humans could earn respect in the galaxy through courage and sacrifice. Tomorrow, he would test that belief in the most direct way possible. The arena of Harmony Point was ancient, built in the days when personal combat was common. Jake would face Admiral Kexthara in a place where honor had been decided by strength and skill for thousands of years. He was ready. The arena of Harmony Point was carved from solid rock deep within the station's core. It was a circular chamber 50 meters across, with seating carved into the walls rising up like an ancient amphitheater. The floor was covered in sand that had absorbed the blood of countless warriors over the centuries. Jake entered through one of the fighter's gates, wearing simple combat gear. His plasma sword hung at his side, its power cell fully charged. The combat knife was strapped to his leg. He had no armor except for basic protective padding. The rules of combat required that both fighters wear equivalent protection. The viewing galleries were packed. Representatives from every species in the Galactic Council had come to witness the combat. Many had brought recording equipment to document what they expected to be a quick execution. News of the challenge had spread throughout the station. Even maintenance workers and traders had found ways to watch. Admiral Kexthara entered from the opposite gate, and Jake felt his confidence waver. The old warrior was an imposing figure, even without his formal uniform. His blue-green skin was marked with ritual scars that told the story of his victories. His weapons were ancient but well-maintained, a curved blade that seemed to drink. In the light, and a shorter weapon that crackled with energy. Chancellor Vextar stood in the center of the arena. His voice carried clearly through the chamber. We gathered to witness combat between Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison of Earth and Admiral Kexthara of the Zelethi Empire. The challenge was made to defend the honor of the fallen. Let truth be revealed through trial by combat. Jake walked to the center of the arena. Up close, Admiral Kexthara was even more intimidating. The old warrior was taller, stronger, and had the confidence that came from centuries of victories. His cold eyes studied Jake like a predator examining prey. You still have time to withdraw your challenge, Kexthara said quietly. I take no pleasure in killing the young and foolish. I won't withdraw, Jake replied. Lisa's honor is worth more than my life. The Admiral's expression showed something that might have been respect. So be it. Die with courage, human. Chancellor, Vextar raised his hand. Let the combat begin. Jake barely had time to draw his sword before Kexthara attacked. The Admiral moved with fluid grace, his blade cutting through the air where Jake's head had been a moment before. Jake rolled to the side, coming up in a defensive stance. The next few minutes were a blur of motion. Kexthara pressed his attack with the skill of centuries. His blade seemed to be everywhere at once, forcing Jake to give ground steadily. The human's younger reflexes were the only thing keeping him alive. Jake tried to find an opening for a counterattack, but the Admiral's defense was perfect. Every time Jake thought he saw a chance, Kexthara was ready with a counter. The old warrior was not just skilled, he was experienced in ways that Jake could not match. Blood began to flow from several small cuts on Jake's arms and legs. Kexthara's blade had found its mark multiple times. The Admiral himself was unmarked, fighting with the calm precision of someone who had never doubted the outcome. "Your friend diedly," Kexthara said as their blades locked together. She begged for her life at the end. Jake's anger flared, and he pushed back hard. But anger made him careless. Kexthara's counterattack opened a deep cut across Jake's ribs. The human stumbled backward, blood staining his shirt. The crowd in the galleries was silent. They were watching what everyone had expected, a slow, methodical execution. Jake was brave, but courage was not enough against a warrior of Kexthara. Skilled Jake wiped blood from his eyes and tried to think. He was losing badly. The Admiral was playing with him, drawing out the combat to make a point. Every cut was precise, designed to weaken rather than kill quickly. But as Jake studied his opponent, he began to notice something. Kexthara's movements were perfect, but they were also predictable. The Admiral was fighting according to classical techniques, using forms that were centuries old. His style was formal and traditional. Jake had learned to fight in a different school. Human combat techniques had been developed through constant warfare among their own species. They were adaptive, unpredictable, and often brutal. Where Kexthara fought with elegant precision, Jake had learned to fight with desperate creativity. The next time Kexthara attacked, Jake did something unexpected. Instead of trying to block or dodge, he stepped directly into the attack. The Admiral's blade cut deep into Jake's shoulder, but Jake's own sword found its mark for the first time. The plasma edge burned through the Admiral's side, drawing first blood. Kexthara stepped back, looking surprised. A thin line of blue-green blood marked his ribs. It was the first time he had been wounded in combat for over 50 years. "Interesting," the Admiral said. "You fight like a barbarian." "I fight like a human," Jake replied, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. The combat changed character. Kexthara became more cautious, no longer certain of easy victory. Jake pressed his advantage, using techniques that the Admiral had never encountered. He fought dirty when necessary, using his environment and his desperation as weapons. Jake's combat knife came into play as the fighters moved closer together. The shorter weapon was perfect for the close-quarters fighting that Jake was forcing. Kexthara's longer blade was less effective at close range, but the Admiral was adapting too. His centuries of experience included combat against dozens of different species. He began to read Jake's unconventional tactics and respond appropriately. The fight became a brutal test of endurance. Both warriors were bleeding from multiple wounds. Jake's youth and desperation were balanced against Kexthara's skill and experience. The outcome was no longer certain. Jake thought about Lisa as he fought. He remembered her laugh, her determination, her belief that humans could make a difference in the galaxy. Every memory gave him strength to continue. The turning point came when Kexthara attempted a killing blow. The Admiral's blade swept in a perfect arc toward Jake's neck. It was a classical technique, executed with flawless precision. Any properly trained warrior would have been unable to defend against it. But Jake was not properly trained. He had learned to fight in situations where there were no rules, no honor, only survival. Instead of trying to block the attack, he threw himself forward in a desperate tackle. Both fighters went down hard. Jake's shoulder slammed into Kexthara's chest, driving the air from the Admiral's lungs. They rolled across the sand, grappling with knives and fists. Jake found himself on top, his combat knife at Kexthara's throat. The Admiral's own blade was pressed against Jake's ribs, ready to pierce his heart. For a moment, neither fighter moved. Yield, Jake gasped. Admit the truth about Lisa. Kexthara's eyes were cold. I do not yield to humans. Then we both die, Jake said, but Lisa's honor will be restored. The Admiral's blade pressed harder against Jake's ribs. Jake could feel the point beginning to penetrate his skin. But he did not move his own weapon away from Kexthara's throat. You would die for a lie? Kexthara asked. I would die for the truth, Jake replied. The question is whether you would die for a lie. Something changed in the Admiral's expression. For the first time since the combat began, Jake saw uncertainty in those ancient eyes. The old warrior was realizing that Jake meant exactly what he said. The human would die before backing down. You truly believe she was a hero, Kexthara said quietly. I know she was a hero, Jake replied through gritted teeth. I've seen the testimonies. I've heard from the people she saved. Your own people, Admiral. The families that Lisa died protecting. The arena was completely silent. The thousands of spectators watched two warriors balanced on the edge of mutual destruction. Both blades were poised to kill. The slightest movement from either fighter would end both their lives. The testimonies could be fabricated, Kexthara said, but his voice lacked conviction. Contact them yourself, Jake challenged. Speak to Markith, to Valara, to Commander Kexvani. Ask them what really happened at Station Omega-7. 4 long seconds, neither fighter moved. Then, slowly, Admiral Kexthara began to lower his weapon. Jake kept his knife at the Admiral's throat, not trusting the movement. I yield, Kexthara said clearly. The words echoed through the arena like thunder. A collective gasp rose from the spectators. The legendary Admiral Kexthara had yielded to a human junior officer. Jake slowly pulled his knife away and rolled. Off the Admiral. Both fighters lay on the sand, breathing heavily and bleeding from their wounds. Jake's vision was blurry from blood loss, but he had won. More importantly, Lisa's honor had been defended. Medical teams rushed onto the arena floor. Jake felt hands lifting him, carrying him toward the medical station. As consciousness faded, he heard the crowd erupting in conversation. The impossible had happened. A human had defeated a galactic legend in single combat. Jake woke up in the medical bay several hours later. His wounds had been treated and bandaged. Ben Taylor was sitting beside his bed, grinning widely. You did it, Ben said. You actually did it. The whole galaxy is talking about the human who beat Admiral Kexthara. Jake tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. How is he? Alive. His wounds were serious, but not life-threatening. The medical team says he'll recover fully. Ben's expression became more serious. Jake, he's asking to see you. Why? I don't know. But Ambassador Carter thinks you should talk. 2 days after the combat, Jake stood before the Galactic Council once again. His arm was in a sling, and bandages covered the worst of his wounds. But he was alive, and more importantly, he was vindicated. The chamber was packed beyond capacity. Word of the combat had spread throughout the galaxy. Representatives from species that rarely attended council sessions had traveled to Harmony Point to witness the aftermath. The human who had defeated a legend was now the center of galactic attention. Admiral Kexthara entered the chamber wearing simple robes instead of his elaborate uniform. The old warrior moved slowly, still recovering from his wounds. But his bearing was straight and dignified. He had come to face the consequences of his dishonor. Chancellor Vextar called the session to order. We reconvened to address the challenge combat and its resolution. Admiral Kexthara has requested permission to speak. The Admiral walked to the center of the chamber. Jake watched from the human delegation section, still amazed by what had happened. 3 days ago, he had been a junior officer accompanying a routine trade mission. Now he was at the center of a galactic political earthquake. Honored Chancellor, members of the Council, Kexthara began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. I come before you to acknowledge my shame and make amends for my dishonor. The silence was complete. No one had expected the legendary Admiral to publicly admit error. I made accusations against Commander Lisa Park of the Earth Space Force. I claimed that she was a coward who failed in her duty. I stated that she abandoned Zealothi civilians to save herself. These accusations were false. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Jake felt his chest tighten with emotion. I have contacted the survivors of Station Omega 7. I have reviewed the complete records of the incident. The truth is that Commander Park was a hero of the highest order. She saved 237 lives through 7 separate rescue runs. She died at her post, using her own strength to hold open a damaged docking bay so that the final evacuation shuttle could escape. The Admiral's voice grew stronger as he continued. Commander Park could have escaped with the first shuttle. Instead, she organized the entire evacuation operation. She ensured that families stayed together. She gave priority to children and the elderly. When automated systems failed, she took manual control. When the structure began to collapse, she remained behind to save others. Jake closed his eyes, remembering his friend. This was the Lisa he had known, brave, selfless, and dedicated to protecting others. I made my false accusations based on incomplete information and personal prejudice, Kexthara continued. I wanted to believe that humans were weak because it served my political purposes. I dishonored myself, my people, and most importantly, the memory of a true hero. The Admiral turned to face the human delegation. Lieutenant Commander Morrison challenged me to combat to defend his friend's honor. He risked his life to protect the truth. He showed courage that I had forgotten existed. Kexthara bowed deeply toward Jake. In Zealothi culture, this was a gesture of profound respect reserved for honored equals. I formally apologized to the human delegation, to the families Commander Park saved, and to her memory. I ask forgiveness for my dishonor and pledge to make whatever amends are possible. The chamber erupted in conversation. Representatives from dozens of species were talking frantically. This was unprecedented, a galactic legend publicly admitting error and asking forgiveness from a species many considered inferior. Chancellor Vextar called for order. The Galactic Council acknowledges Admiral Kexthara's statement. Ambassador Carter, does the human delegation wish to respond? Helen Carter stood gracefully. The human delegation accepts Admiral Kexthara's apology. We are grateful for his courage in acknowledging the truth. Commander Park's memory has been honored by his words. But Jake knew this was about more than just an apology. The political implications were enormous. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted. Over the following days, the effects became clear. The story of the human who defeated Admiral Kexthara spread throughout known space. But more importantly, the story of Lisa Park's heroism traveled with it. News networks, diplomatic channels, and trade communications all carried the tale of a human commander who died saving alien civilians. The political negotiations resumed with a completely different dynamic. The Zealothi Empire, embarrassed by their admiral's behavior, offered generous terms for the Kepler sector. The human colonies would not only keep their worlds, but would receive protection guarantees and favorable trade agreements. Other species began to view humans differently. The Andorian Republic offered a formal alliance. The Centauri Confederation proposed joint exploration missions. Even the ancient Firstborn expressed interest in cultural exchanges. Jake found himself at the center of this attention, and he did not enjoy it. He had not fought for glory or political advantage. He had fought for his friend's memory. The fame that followed felt hollow. 3 weeks after the combat, Jake attended a ceremony he had not expected. The Galactic Council had voted to establish the Lisa Park Memorial Fund, dedicated to supporting rescue operations and humanitarian missions throughout the galaxy. The fund would be administered jointly by human and Zelithy organizations. Admiral Kexthara attended the ceremony. The old warrior approached Jake afterward, walking with a slight limp that would never fully heal. "I have a proposal for you, Lieutenant." "Commander," Kexthara said. "What kind of proposal?" "The Zelithy Empire is establishing a new training program for rescue operations. We want to ensure that future missions are conducted with the same skill and courage that Commander Park demonstrated. We would like you to help design the curriculum." Jake was surprised. "Why me?" "Because you understood her values well enough to risk your life defending them. Because you fought not for personal gain, but for principle. Those are the qualities we want to teach." Jake considered the offer. It would mean working closely with the people who had once been enemies. It would mean spending time away from Earth and the familiar routines of military service. But it would also mean continuing Lisa's work. It would mean making sure that her sacrifice had lasting meaning. "I'll consider it," Jake said. "There is one more thing," Kexthara added. "The Empire has decided to name our new rescue training facility the Park Memorial Academy. We hope that her family will approve." Jake felt tears threatening. "They'll approve." Lisa always wanted to make a difference. 6 months later, Jake stood on the bridge of a new ship. The U's Lisa Park was the most advanced rescue vessel in human space, designed specifically for humanitarian missions. Jake wore the insignia of a full commander, promoted for his actions at Harmony Point. Ben Taylor served as his executive officer. The crew was mixed: humans, Zelithy, Andorians, and members of other species who had volunteered for rescue duty. It was exactly the kind of diverse, cooperative effort that Lisa had believed in. Their first mission was already planned. A civilian transport had been damaged in the outer rim, stranded with 200 passengers. The U's Lisa Park would lead a joint rescue operation, proving that different species could work together to save lives. As the ship prepared to depart, Jake thought about his friend. Lisa had died believing that humans could earn their place in the galaxy through courage and compassion. Her sacrifice had not only vindicated that belief, but had changed how the entire galaxy viewed humanity. Admiral Kexthara had been right about one thing. Combat did reveal truth. But the truth it had revealed was not about superior strength or skill. It was about the power of friendship, the importance of honor, and the courage required to stand up for what is right. Jake's victory in the arena had been important, but Lisa's victory in death had been greater. She had shown that heroism was not about species or politics. It was about the willingness to sacrifice for others, regardless of who they were or where they came from. The UE's Lisa Park moved away from its docking port and turned toward the stars. In the forward viewer, Jake could see the vast expanse of the galaxy filled with countless worlds and civilizations. Somewhere out there, people needed help, and the crew of the Lisa Park would be ready to answer that call. Ben Taylor joined Jake at the viewer. "She would have loved this," he said quietly. "She would have been the first to volunteer." Jake agreed. As the ship entered hyperspace, Jake felt a sense of completion. Lisa's memory had been honored. Her values had been vindicated. Her sacrifice had brought different species together in common cause. And somewhere in the vast galaxy ahead, more lives would be saved because of the courage of a woman who had refused to abandon her post. Lisa Park's legend would continue to grow, not through stories of personal glory, but through the lives she had inspired others to save. The human species had found its place among the stars not through conquest or politics, but through the simple act of caring about others. It was a lesson that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. Jake smiled as he watched the stars stream past. Lisa's work was just beginning.